Hi, I am Justice and this is Cass. We are interviewing Arthur Perry today, November 1st, 2010, at Ambridge-Narrows Regional Library.
Mr. Arthur Perry, it was 1925 when you were born. What is your earliest memory as a young child?
Well, my earliest memory would be before I went to school, about 5 years old. Kids used to play hopscotch. I don't know whether you ever heard tell of that or not, but it was a game we played when we were kids, and we hopped along on held one leg up, and we threw a piece of glass or a piece of pottery out in the little squares, and we hopped out and got it, and they called it hopscotch. So anyway, that was before I went to school, and that's about the earliest I can remember.
Can you share with us about your family while you were growing up?
Yes, my father died when I was only 2 years old, 1927, so my mother had to keep boarders and serve meals to make money to keep us going, and at that time there was no welfare or no assistance of any kind for people that didn't have enough money to keep going. So it was getting to the Depression times, and things were quite hard then, and we done all right. We got by her keeping boarders, and so anyway, later on I got a bit older, and I was able to cut wood and help out that way. We didn't have any woodland, so I had to get wood from Mr. Victor Robinson, and I cut his firewood and cut ours when I was a teenager with an axe and a pulp saw, piled it up, and it was in long lengths, and we hauled it in with bobsleds in the highway, and I helped him haul it, and he hauled our wood, and then we got a woodcutter in the spring, and paid the woodcutter, but we changed works with the other people that helped. I helped them saw their wood. So anyway, and after I got a bit older, about that time I was working on Gordon Robinson's truck, loading pulpwood and lumber and logs and stuff like that. So I didn't go to school long enough to get enough education. I regretted that later.
When you were growing up, did you have electricity? And did you have phones back then?
We had no electricity till 1937. And we had no phone, but there was what they called the Mott line from, it was just a local telephone company that Mr. Harry Mott had down Lower Cambridge. And his house still stands there. Mrs. Waldo lives in that house now. So that's where the Mott line originated from.
How old were you when you went to work, and where did you work?
I was only about 15 when I started hard labor, loading pulp and logs and stuff on the truck. So as I quit school too early, which I'm sorry to say, but anyway, I thought that I'd sooner go to work, but I never liked going to school.
What types of chores did you need to do?
Well, at home we had a cow, and when I went to school, I used to have to run up at noontime, take the cow out, and before I got my lunch, and then take the cow out to water, and that was one chore I done, and had got in the wood and carried the wood into the house, and things like that.
How old were you when you started your family?
I was 29 years old.
What were some of the challenging or exciting events for you as you started out on your own?
I worked out in the woods and stayed in a woods camp, and quite a big crew of men there, and you had to keep your end up, cut every night. The boss wanted you to give the count of how many logs you cut, so you had to cut quite a fair amount to keep up with the rest of the men. So.
How did you get your food?
Well, we had a cow, and we had our milk, and my mother made butter, and we had 2 pigs, and the skim milk went to the pigs, and we fed them apples and stuff like that, and we generally had a garden and had our vegetables, and then we bought quite a lot. Our stores were right handy to us, so we of course had to have more food because my mother was serving meals, and she bought a lot of the groceries at the stores, and so at that time it was quite hard. Most everybody ran a store bill, didn't have the money right off quick, and so eventually when I got bigger, we got a store bill paid off, and so that's the way it was then.
When did you meet your wife?
I met her in 1952, and at a dance over in the Orange Lodge, or Orange Hall over across the river. You know where the old Orange Hall is? It's just across from where the park is there now. You know, that old building that the trees are growing around? Used to be the Orange Hall. The Orangemen used to have a 12th of July, they had a parade, and they had a picnic there, and they had dances and everything. Years ago, it was quite nice. They had generally a parade through the bridge, and they had the pipe band, and they sounded real nice. They had Gordon Robinson rode a white horse as represent King William, and he drove the horse ahead of the band, and it was quite nice. So anyway.
Can you tell us about your 2 children?
Yes, oldest girl, Shirley. Her name is Appleby now, and she lives up in Roosagornish, and she works at the airport. Works at security on the airport. Checks people out going on the planes, and the youngest daughter lives across the road from us. Her name is Shelley Poirier, and she married a man from, her husband is from Cape Breton, and he's from Cheticamp, Cape Breton, and he's a boiler maker, works at Point Lepreau, and she works at, she's a safety person for the New Brunswick Construction Safety Association. So she works St. John today, and Fredericton, and Moncton, and sometimes goes to Miramichi and different places.
You went to school until grade 8. Did you ever get in trouble in school?
No, I never got a strapping or anything like that. Years ago, when the discipline was different than it is today, the teacher had a big strap, and if you misbehaved, why, you stood up there in front of the class and you held your hand out, and they come on out with the big strap, and it kept things pretty straight in there. You didn't behave too much. But I remember a fellow by the name of Billy Hill that went to school, and he got a strapping every day, pretty much. So anyway, another thing I could think of was kind of funny, that Victor Robinson used to have a pasture right by the school, and he had sheep there, and he had a big ram in there, and we as kids used to tease that ram, and he'd get out of the pasture and chase us, and we thought that was good fun. And we'd go out there with baseball bats and stuff and chase him back, and then we'd turn around and run for the school, and he'd be after us, and the ram would be kind of ugly and worked up, so he'd take it out. We'd have bicycles by the side of the school, and he'd be banging into those bicycles, and anyway, we thought that was quite fun.
Did you have any hobbies?
Yes, I'd done some woodworking, and I liked that pretty good, and that was just about mainly the only thing I done for a hobby. Yeah.
When did you own your first vehicle?
I had my first vehicle was a Austin A40 Austin, 1950, and I bought it over at Buchanan's in Sussex, and the water was up in the spring quite high, and I don't know, I forget how it was, but I didn't have my license, and I got Howard Knott to drive my car home. So anyway, but shortly after I got my license. At that time, you had no test, and you just walked in, and I wrote you out a driver's license, and you walked out with it. So anyway.
Have you had any adventures involving vehicles?
Oh yes, with that Austin, the distributor wasn't very waterproof, and I remember one time sitting on I went to St. John and got my girlfriend, my wife now, and we were coming back, and out on the big hill this side of Belial, it was raining real hard, and we couldn't make the hill. The car was cutting out and getting wet in the distributor, and finally we sat there for a long time, couldn't get up. Finally I got my coat off and out over and dried out the distributor with a rag, and on we went. So that was I always remembered that. Yeah.
How many stores were back then?
Stores? There was 4 stores, 2 on each side, the river. Fred Brier had a store, and Gordon Robinson had a store on that side, and on the other side was Leslie Crummell and Walter Akerley. So, they were general stores. They kept, Robinsons and Walter Akerley had about hardware and about everything you needed around, and beside groceries. And
Can you tell us about other buildings?
yes, there was 4 stores, and then just down around the corner from Robinson's store was the White House Inn, where they kept people overnight there and had meals, and across the river was Washington White Lodge, they called it. And the big house is gone now, torn down I don't know, it was this spring or last year. And anyway, and my mother, our house was up across from Bill Jeffrey's store there, and she kept boarders there, and there was a lot of houses that's gone now. The up on top of the hill years ago was a big hotel, and it was torn down in 1937, and the lumber from it was Mrs. Murray had the lumber from it to build her house that stands there today, just across the road here. And there was a top of the hill, there was a barber shop, and there was a small house, and there was a barn, and then we had a barn just down, coming up the hill there, and across the field was a house, Joe Ham house, Burfield Ham, and Straits had their house is still there. Bob Black has that house now. He's done it all over, and next were there was a big barn there at Straits, had a woodshed and then a barn, and Emerson Ferris had a barn next, and then his house, and then Theodore White's house was next, and they had a barn down behind it, and then Bedford's up on top of the hill, and so they had a barn too out from that, and then all the houses here are up on top of the hill are Dr. Walter's house and the Burns house, and and so yes, and I guess that's mainly the houses.
What are some of the things that happened in your community that you recall from your childhood?
Well, in 1943, my uncle and aunt were coming up the river down with a truck below McDonald's Corner, and right at McDonald's Corner there's a point there, and they had a burst in the winter time, and went through the ice, and they both got drowned. So, and I remember that well. I was 18 years old, and I was down, and they brought them up, and they were laid out in our house there, and I remember that well. So, and I had two uncles that were drowned in the Washtenaw Lake. So my other uncle Charlie was drowned in a. They'd been muskratting down in the lower part of the lake, and they were coming up to the middle of the lake in the spring. And he and Blair Ham, and the canoe was loaded too heavy, and big waves, and the canoe sunk in the cold water. They couldn't swim. Uncle Charlie could swim, but water was too cold. And I have his shotgun now that went down with them in the canoe, and they recovered it, and it still works good. So, anyway.
What was the proximate population in Cambridge and the Narrows, and when you were growing up?
Well, at that time, Cambridge-Narrows was split up, and Cambridge was on this side of the lake, and Narrows was on the other side. And the Cambridge area would be smaller, and the people were separated more because the lots were 100 acres or 200 acres, and mostly farm land, and so it would be Cambridge area would be quite a lot smaller, and I'd say maybe at a guess 150 people maybe.
Can you share some interesting facts about your life?
Yes, when we got married in 1954, that was a good part of my life, and anyway, we didn't go far. We went to Prince Edward Island on our honeymoon, and that was very nice, and it was an important part of my life when our daughters were born, and I was very lucky to have two nice daughters, and they're real good to us, and our son-in-laws are real good, and they do anything for us, so that's very nice for us as we get older. And so I'd like to say that, another thing I'd like to tell you is about back when I went to school. There was no school buses, and we had the one-room school, and we had a stove in the middle of the school, and the teacher taught all grades up to grade 10, I guess, to grade 9. And I don't know, there would probably be maybe 35, 40 students in the school. And the children had to walk for up to 2 miles to get to school, even the young ones starting to school, and it was pretty hard on them in the winter time. My Elva McConaughey, she was Elva Vale. She and her brother and sister had to walk from Cherry Hill into McDonald's Corner when they were only little kids to go to school, all through the woods. And it must have been pretty hard on them. So